The first thing I noticed when I came home was not what had been moved. It was the rectangle of clean carpet against the wall. For 47 years, my wife's piano had stood in that exact place. Dark walnut. 3 chipped ivory keys. A burn mark near the left corner from the Christmas Eve when my brother put a candle where Rose specifically told him not to. Now there was nothing. Only 4 small dents in the carpet where the legs had been. I put down my overnight bag. Then I called my son. He answered with the kind of cheerful voice people use when they already know why you are calling. "Hey, Dad. Where's the piano?" The cheerfulness disappeared. "Okay." That was all he said. Not what piano. Not I don't know. Not maybe someone stole 600 pounds of furniture through the front door while nobody noticed. Just, "Okay. Mark. I donated it." I sat down. "You what?" "To the Westfield Community Arts Center. They run music lessons. They needed an upright piano." "You gave away your mother's piano?" "Dad, you haven't opened it in almost 3 years. It was not yours to give away." "I know." "No. Apparently you don't." I stood again because sitting felt too much like accepting the conversation. "I asked you to move the bookcase. I moved the bookcase. And then you decided to empty the rest of my living room?" "The piano was blocking the radiator." "It has blocked that radiator since 1977. Yes. That is not the argument you think it is." "My name is Walter Mercer. I was 78 years old when my eldest son gave away the last object in my house that still sounded like my wife. Rose had died 3 years earlier. We had been married 52 years. And although I had not played the piano since her funeral, every morning I passed it on my way to the kitchen and saw the same scratches, the same music books and the same faded photographs she kept on top. I knew exactly which key made a clicking noise. I knew which hinge squeaked when the lid opened. I knew the shape of the worn patch on the bench where she had sat almost every evening of our marriage. And my son had removed it while I spent one night at my daughter's house. I thought that was the betrayal. It wasn't. The real story began 40 minutes later when a piano tuner named Grace Nolan called me and said, "Mr. Mercer, I think you should come to the Arts Center before your son does." I tightened my hand around the telephone. "Why?" Grace became quiet. Then she said, "Because somebody hid 34 letters beneath the keyboard." I did not speak. Grace continued, "They're all in your wife's handwriting." I closed my eyes. "Who are they addressed to?" She answered with a name I had not heard inside my house for 18 years. "Peter Mercer. My younger son." The son Rose told everyone was living his own life. The son Mark said had abandoned us. The son I had not spoken to since he was 35. And according to Grace, every letter had been written after the day Peter walked out of my home and I told him not to come back until he learned what family meant. I drove to Westfield Community Arts Center in 11 minutes. It normally took 18. I am not proud of that detail. The Arts Center occupied an old elementary school the town had nearly demolished 20 years earlier. The classrooms had been turned into studios. The gym became a small theater. The cafeteria became a workshop. Rose would have loved it. That irritated me immediately. A volunteer led me to room 6. The piano stood against the far wall. Seeing it there felt wrong. Not damaged. Not abandoned. Just somewhere else. For some reason, that was worse. A woman with silver hair was crouched beside the keyboard. She stood when I entered. "Walter?" "Yes. I'm Grace." She had removed the front panel beneath the keys. Inside the piano, on the wooden shelf behind the action, was a bundle wrapped in a yellow tea towel. I knew the towel. Rose had owned 6 exactly like it. They had little blue flowers printed along the edge. She complained for 30 years that I used them to wipe my hands after working in the garage. I reached for the bundle. Grace stopped me. "Before you open them, there's something else." She handed me an envelope. My name was written on it. Walter. Nothing else. I recognized Rose's handwriting immediately. I opened it. The note inside was only 4 lines. "Walter, if you found these, then either the piano finally broke or somebody moved it without asking you. Knowing our children, I have my guess. Please read everything before you decide which son you are angry with. Love, Rose." Grace turned away. I think she was trying to give me privacy. I think she also wanted to hear what happened next. So did I. The first letter was dated 17 years earlier. 6 months after Peter left. Rose had written, "Peter, your father still puts 3 cups on the counter every Sunday morning before he remembers you are not coming." I stopped. That was not true. At least I did not remember it being true. I continued. "He is angry because anger is the only form of missing you he currently knows how to perform." I sat on the piano bench. Rose had been dead 3 years and was already insulting me from inside a musical instrument. That seemed efficient even for her. Peter was my younger son. Mark came first. 4 years later came Peter. They looked alike as boys. They became opposites as men. Mark liked plans, schedules, lists, savings accounts, knowing where he would be at 5 o'clock next Thursday. Peter played the piano. That sentence explained more about our relationship than it should have. Rose taught him when he was 5. By 9, he was better than she was. By 14, people stopped talking when he played. I did not dislike music. I disliked uncertainty. I spent 39 years managing a distribution warehouse. You could count boxes, measure time, compare fuel costs, track delivery failures. When Peter told me at 17 that he wanted to study music, I asked what job came at the end. He said, "I don't know." I heard, "There is no job." Rose heard a young man who loved something. We spent years translating Peter differently. He did study music. I paid half his tuition. Rose and Peter paid the rest with scholarships, weekend work and more optimism than I considered responsible. He graduated. Then he did something that seemed designed specifically to prove me right. He struggled. He played weddings, churches, hotel bars, school productions. He taught lessons. For 2 years, he earned less than Mark earned during his first year as an accountant. I never missed an opportunity to notice. Then Peter moved to Chicago. A music program offered him a teaching position and performance work. Rose was thrilled. I told him it sounded temporary. That became another pattern. Anything Peter was proud of, I inspected for weakness. The argument that ended us happened years later. Rose had undergone surgery and needed help at home for several weeks. Mark lived 15 minutes away. Peter lived 700 miles away. Mark came every day. Peter came for 4 days. On the 5th morning, he told us he had to return to Chicago because his students had a major performance and he had already canceled 2 weeks of work. I told him his mother mattered more than a concert. Peter said, "She told me to go." I said, "Of course she did. She is your mother." He said, "And you are my father. You could try wanting something for me once." I remember the kitchen becoming very quiet. Mark was there. Rose was upstairs. I told Peter he had spent his whole life confusing selfishness with independence. Peter told me I had spent his whole life waiting for him to fail so I could call my fear wisdom. Then he left. I shouted from the hallway, "When you understand what family means, you know where the door is." Peter stopped. He turned around. And he said, "That door only opens one way, Dad." Then he walked out. For years, I told people my younger son moved away. That was accurate. It was also cowardly. Peter did not merely move. We stopped speaking. At first, Rose tried to fix it. She told me to call him. I said he knew our number. She told Peter to call me. He apparently said the same thing. Pride is remarkable. It can make two people who love each other sit beside telephones for years while both insist the other person knows how to dial. The second letter was written a year after the first. Rose wrote about my retirement. She told Peter the first pretended not to notice his name missing from the cards. The third letter mentioned Christmas. The fourth included a photograph of Rose and me beside the piano. The fifth thanked Peter for flowers. I stopped. "Flowers?" Grace looked over. "I'm sorry?" "Nothing." Except it was not nothing. Every year on Rose's birthday, flowers arrived. White lilies. She told me they were from an old friend named Elaine. There was no Elaine. They were from Peter. I laughed once. It sounded unpleasant. Grace said, "You don't have to read all of these here." "Yes, I do." "Why?" "Because apparently my wife ran an international postal service through the back of a piano and I would like to understand it." Grace smiled. Rose would have liked her. That irritated me too. Letter 11 changed the story. Until then, I assumed Rose had simply maintained contact with Peter without telling me. I was hurt. But I understood it. Then I read, "I will not lie to your father if he asks me directly whether we speak. But he does not ask. He has built an entire piece around not asking." I lowered the letter. That was harder to argue with. Rose had never told me she had stopped speaking to Peter. I had assumed it. And assumption had been convenient because it meant I never had to ask what kind of mother stopped speaking to her own son merely because her husband had. Rose had not betrayed an agreement. There was no agreement. I had simply behaved as though my anger had become family policy. At letter 15, Grace left the room. She returned with coffee. She did not ask whether I wanted it. Good decision. The letters covered almost 16 years. Peter had moved from Chicago to Madison, then Milwaukee. He had married a woman named Dana. I knew that part. Rose had told me years earlier that she had heard through someone. Apparently someone was Peter. He had a daughter. I knew that too. Her name was Emily. What I did not know was that Rose had met her 4 times. The first time Emily was 6. Rose told me she was visiting an old school friend for a weekend. She had taken a train to Wisconsin. She met my granddaughter without me. That hurt differently. Not because Rose went. Because I had made the alternative impossible. I saw a photograph inside letter 20. Rose sat on a park bench beside a little girl with dark hair. The girl held an ice cream cone. Rose was laughing. I had never seen the photograph. I knew exactly how Rose laughed when she had forgotten someone was holding a camera. I stared at the picture until it blurred. Grace put a box of tissues on the piano. She did not say anything. I appreciated her for that. Then I reached letter 23. It was not about Peter. It was about Mark. Peter, your brother is tired. He will never say it because he thinks being dependable is the same as never being allowed to resent what people depend on him for. I read it twice. Rose described Mark taking her to appointments, fixing our gutters, sorting insurance forms, driving 40 minutes after work because the freezer made a noise I disliked. She wrote, "He loves us. He also resents that loving us has become a schedule. Both can be true." I put the letter down. Until that moment, Mark had occupied a very comfortable role in my mind. The good son. Peter was the son who left. Mark was the son who stayed. That story had benefited me enormously. It meant every time Mark came over, I could treat his presence as proof of his character instead of a cost to his time. I rarely asked what staying required. My phone rang. "Mark." I answered. "Where are you?" "At the Arts Center." Silence. "You found them." "Not." "Found what?" "Not." "What are you talking about?" "You found them." I stood. "You knew." Mark exhaled. "Some of it." "How much?" "Dad? How much?" "I knew Mom wrote to Peter." "For how long?" "Years." "You knew she visited him?" "Yes." I walked away from Grace. My voice dropped. "And you never told me." "Mom asked me not to." "So you lied for her?" "No." Mark's voice hardened. I stopped volunteering information to a man who punished everyone who brought up Peter. I did not answer. He continued. "You want to know why Mom went alone? Because the first 2 years after Peter left, anytime she mentioned his name, you turned dinner into a courtroom. She got tired. So did I." I looked at the piano. "Is that why you gave it away?" Mark did not answer immediately. "Yes." That surprised me more than I expected. "You knew the letters were inside?" "No." "Then what does Peter have to do with the piano?" Mark became quiet. "Everything." He arrived 20 minutes later. Grace left us alone. Completely this time. Mark stood in the classroom doorway. He was 56. Gray at the temples. Still wearing the work shirt he had probably planned to change before seeing me. I thought of Rose's letter. "Your brother is tired." Mark looked tired. I had not noticed. "Why the piano?" He sat at a student desk. "Because I hated it." I almost laughed. "You hated your mother's piano?" "Yes." "Since when?" "Since I was about 18. Mark stared at the instrument. "Do you remember Saturdays when we were kids?" "Of course." Peter had lessons. Mom sat beside him. They played together. "You were at baseball?" "Yes." "You took me. I sat in bleachers with you every Saturday for 10 years. That is supposed to be bad?" "No. I liked baseball." Mark rubbed his hands together. But Peter and Mom had something. They understood each other. They had music. "And you and I had what?" "Responsibilities." The answer was immediate. That made it worse. Mark continued. "You taught me to change oil. Balance a checkbook. Show up early. Finish what I started. Good things. But when something broke, you called me. When Mom wanted to laugh, she called Peter." I stared at him. "You think your mother loved him more?" "No." Mark shook his head. "I think all four of us got assigned parts so young that none of us knew we were still playing them 40 years later." That sounded like Rose. I wondered whether Mark had been reading her letters before me. Then I remembered he did not know they were there. "Why give it away now?" "Because every time I came to your house, it was there. And Mom was gone." "You think I didn't know that?" "No. I think you knew it so much that you stopped living in half the room. You wouldn't move the piano. You wouldn't sit on the bench. You wouldn't let anyone play it. Emily came here last Christmas and asked if she could play." "Emily?" "My daughter." I felt foolish. I had another granddaughter named Emily. Peter's daughter. For a second, I had forgotten Mark's daughter had the same name. Rose had joked about that once. Two sons too stubborn to speak, both naming daughters Emily because it was Rose's mother's name. The universe had a sense of humor. Our family did not. Mark continued. "You told her not to touch it." I said it needed tuning. "You told a 24-year-old woman that touching Grandma's piano would disturb the dust." I remembered. At the time, I thought I was joking. Apparently I had become the kind of man whose jokes people obeyed. "So you gave it away to teach me a lesson?" "No." Mark looked at me. "I gave it away because I was angry." There was no defense in his voice. "I was moving the bookcase. I saw that piano. I remembered Mom playing it. I remembered Peter getting everything in her that I never understood. Then I remembered that after Peter left, I got everything else." I sat down. Mark looked toward the floor. "I took her to appointments. I fixed the house. I handled forms. I drove over when you needed something. And Peter sent flowers." There it was. 17 years of resentment compressed into 4 words. "Your mother asked you to keep Peter's secret." Not exactly. Mark sighed. She asked me not to make her choose. I looked at him. Between whom? You and Peter. That answer hurt. Because only one person had ever demanded a choice. Me. Mark glanced at the letters. How many? 34. He smiled sadly. Sounds like Mom. How many times did she see Peter? Mark hesitated. I don't know. Don't. What? Don't protect me now. He studied my face. 8 or 9. I felt something collapse quietly inside me. Did she take trips alone? Some. I drove her twice. You saw him? Yes. When? The last time was about 5 years before Mom died. What happened? Mark laughed softly. We sat in a restaurant for 90 minutes and spoke about you. Why? Because apparently even when you remove yourself from a family, you remain exhausting. I almost smiled. Almost. Did you ask him to come home? Yes. And? He said home was the place he had to apologize for becoming himself. I looked at the piano. That sentence followed me home. I took the letters with me. Grace asked what I wanted to do about the piano. I want it returned. Of course. Today. Grace looked at the instrument. We can arrange that. Good. Then a sound came from the hallway. Piano. Not Rose's piano. Another one. Someone was playing scales badly. Very badly. Grace smiled. Tuesday beginner class. I looked at her. How many students? 27 at the moment. On how many pianos? 3. I looked at Rose's piano. No. Grace frowned. I mean yes. Return it. Understood. I left before the bad scales could become an argument with myself. At home, the clean rectangle in the carpet looked even larger. I sat in Rose's chair with the letters. I read the remaining 11. Letter 27 was written after Rose's cancer diagnosis. I had expected sadness. Instead, she complained about hospital parking. That was Rose. Given bad news, she always began by criticizing something unnecessary. Then she wrote, I have decided I will not use being ill as a weapon to force you and your father into the same room. If you come because you are afraid I am dying, you may leave again when I do. I want something that can survive me. Peter did visit. Twice. I had been out both times. Once Mark took me to a baseball game. Once Anne invited me to lunch. I put the letter down. Mark knew. My daughter Anne knew too. For several minutes, anger gave me somewhere easy to stand. Then Rose's line returned. Please read everything before you decide which son you are angry with. She had not said I was only allowed to choose a son. I called Anne. My daughter lived 45 minutes away. She had inherited Rose's ability to sound guilty before anyone finished accusing her. Hi, Dad. You knew Peter visited your mother. Silence. Then. You found the letters. Apparently everyone knew about the letters except me. I didn't know about the letters. You knew they spoke? Yes. You knew he came here? Yes. You helped arrange it? Once. I closed my eyes. Why? Anne's voice softened. Because Mom asked me. That cannot be everyone's answer. It is. She paused. And because I wanted to see my brother. That stopped me. When did you last speak to Peter? Last month. I stood. Last month? Yes. You speak regularly? Every few weeks. I felt ridiculous. For 18 years, I had thought Peter had disappeared from our family. He had disappeared from me. Those were not the same thing. I asked. Does Mark speak to him? Not much. Why? Because Mark is angry. At Peter? Yes. For leaving? For getting to leave. I sat back down. Anne continued. Dad, Mark loves you. He loved Mom. But when Mom got sick, he became the person everyone called. You called him too? Yes. And I have apologized for that. To Mark? Yes. When? Years ago. I laughed quietly. Apparently my children had spent years developing emotional skills behind my back. I resented the progress. Does Peter know Mom died? Anne became silent. Anne. He was here. I did not understand. What? He came to the funeral. I stood again. No. Yes. I would have seen him. He stayed near the back. You're lying. I'm not. I remembered that day. Not clearly. Grief had made the entire church look underwater. Faces. Flowers. People touching my shoulder. People saying Rose was wonderful as though I needed information. Did he speak to you? Yes. Mark? Briefly. Why didn't he speak to me? Anne answered carefully. He tried. I stopped breathing for half a second. What do you mean? He walked toward you after the service. You were standing with Uncle Frank. Mark saw him. And? Mark told him it wasn't the day. The room became very quiet. My good son. My dependable son. Had sent Peter away from his own mother's funeral before he could speak to me. I hung up on Anne. Not mature. Not fair. But honest. Mark came back that evening. I did not invite him. Anne called him. Apparently she had decided 18 years of family secrecy had reached its quota. Mark stood inside the front door. You know. You sent him away. Yes. I wanted him to deny it. Sometimes a lie gives anger something easier to attack. His honesty did not. Why? Mark looked around the living room. The empty piano space sat behind me. Because Mom was dead. That is your explanation? No. He sat. It is the reason I was angry enough to do something I should not have done. Peter came for 4 days when Mom needed help. I gave her 16 years. Mark. No. His voice broke. I need to say this once without everyone explaining how Peter felt. I stopped. Mark continued. I took Mom to treatment. I watched you fall apart after she died. I cleaned her clothes out of the hospital bag because you couldn't. I handled the bills. The insurance. The food people brought that nobody wanted. The phone calls. And then Peter showed up at the funeral. He looked sad. Everyone looked at him like he had traveled 700 miles out of love. I wanted to ask where that love had been on Tuesday nights when Mom was sick and you called me because the television remote stopped working. I opened my mouth. Mark raised a hand. I know. That wasn't Peter's fault. You called me because I let you. Mom depended on me because I made myself dependable. I had choices. I understand that now. But that morning? I hated him. Mark wiped his eyes with the heel of his hand. When he walked toward you, I thought he was going to get the moment. What moment? The one where the lost son comes home. I said nothing. Mark laughed through his tears. It sounds stupid when I say it now. No. It did not sound stupid. It sounded human. Not good. But human. So you told him to leave? Yes. What did he say? Mark stared at the carpet. He said, "Of course you did." That sentence hurt both of us. I did not forgive Mark that night. He did not ask me to. Instead, he handed me a piece of paper. Peter's telephone number. I stared at it. You have had this? For years. Does he know you're giving it to me? No. Then maybe you should ask. Mark looked at me. That was the first time either of us noticed the irony. I smiled first. Mark did too. Yeah, he said. I probably should. Peter said yes. Not immediately. Mark called him from my kitchen the next morning. I stood outside on the back porch because I suddenly discovered a deep interest in bird feeders. 10 minutes later, Mark opened the door. He said you can call. I looked at the number. Then I spent 6 hours not calling it. At 11:43 that night, I called. He answered on the second ring. Hello? I knew his voice. Older. Lower. But Peter. I had prepared 12 opening sentences. I used none. It's Dad. Silence. Then. I know. I sat at the kitchen table. How? Mark texted me your number would show up. Right. Another silence. 18 years. And we were discussing caller identification. Human beings are disappointing under pressure. I found your mother's letters. Peter exhaled. I wondered if you ever would. You knew she kept copies? She said she kept some. Did she tell you where? No. Mark gave away the piano. Peter laughed. Actually laughed. What? Sorry. Mom always said one day Mark was going to throw that thing through a window. She knew he hated it? Dad? What? Everybody knew Mark hated it. Apparently I had lived in a very observant family. I had simply not participated in the observing. Peter. Yeah? I don't know how to do this. Another silence. Then Peter said, "Neither do I." That helped. I said, "I was wrong." Peter did not answer. So I kept going. "I was wrong when you left. I was wrong before you left. I treated every choice you made that scared me like proof that you were irresponsible. I told myself I was preparing you for the world. Mostly, I was preparing you to defend yourself from me." My voice shook. I let it. "I should have called." Peter finally spoke. "Yes." That was all. No immediate forgiveness. "No. It's okay, Dad." "No. We both made mistakes." Just. Yes. I appreciated him for that. Eventually, Peter said, "I was wrong too. You didn't have to disappear. No. I could have called Mom without making every conversation about why you wouldn't. I could have come home sooner. I could have told Mark I knew what he was carrying. I told myself I was protecting my life from this family. Sometimes I was just protecting my pride." I closed my eyes. "Your mother met Emily?" "Yes. I saw the photograph." Silence. "What is she like?" Peter laughed softly. 26. Opinionated. Bad at answering messages. Excellent pianist. Pianist? Teacher, mostly. Your mother would have liked that. She did. I cried. Quietly. Peter did too. Neither of us mentioned it. We spoke for 41 minutes. Not 18 years. 41 minutes. We did not fix anything. That was one of the reasons the conversation mattered. Before hanging up, Peter said, "Dad?" "Yes?" "Do you still have the piano?" "Technically." "What does technically mean?" "Mark donated it to an art center." Peter laughed again. I discovered I had missed that sound. "They're returning it tomorrow." Peter became quiet. Then. "Why?" "Because it's mine." Another silence. I heard Rose's voice without needing a letter. Peter said carefully, "Okay." I knew that okay. It was the same okay Mark had used when I first asked where the piano went. The family version of, "I disagree, but I have learned this conversation is not worth my blood pressure." I hung up. Then I sat alone in the empty living room. For the first time, I asked myself a question Mark had been asking without saying it. What exactly was I bringing the piano home for? I could not play. That needs clarification. I could play one song. Poorly. Rose taught it to me for our 25th anniversary. I forgot half the notes within a month. Peter could play. Rose could play. Both Emilys could apparently play. I could dust. And for 3 years, I had not even done that properly. I walked over to the clean rectangle. I imagined the piano returning. Same position. Same photographs. Same silence. Then I imagined 27 children sharing 3 pianos. I called Grace. She answered. Please don't tell me you want it delivered tonight. No. Good. I don't want it delivered at all. Grace became quiet. Are you sure? No. She laughed. Those are usually the most interesting decisions. I want one condition. What? The plaque. We don't usually put plaques on donated instruments. I don't want my name on it. All right. Put roses. Grace waited. Then I changed my mind. No. Walter? Put this. This piano belonged to a family that waited too long to listen to one another. Grace said. That is a terrible plaque for children. I laughed. Rose would definitely have liked her. Fine. Just put Rose Mercer. That I can do. Mark came over the next morning expecting movers. There were none. He looked at the empty space. Where is it? Arts Center. They're returning it today. No. Mark looked at me. What happened? I donated it. He stared for 3 seconds. Then he laughed. You spent 2 days calling me a thief. I am still unhappy with your process. You donated the piano to the exact place I donated it. Yes. And somehow this is different? Completely. How? I decided. Mark stopped laughing. Then he nodded. Fair. I told him I had spoken to Peter. Mark looked away. How was it? Awful. He smiled. Good. Good? If it was wonderful, I'd be suspicious. That may be the first sensible thing you said all week. Mark sat where the piano bench had once been. There was no bench now. He looked ridiculous sitting on nothing, so he moved to the sofa. Then he asked, Are you going to see him? I don't know. Mark nodded. Do you want to? I'm afraid to. The words surprised both of us. I had spent my life turning fear into advice. It was strange saying the actual word. Mark said. Then maybe that's a reason to go. Your mother said things like that. I know. It was irritating when she did it too. Peter came to Westfield instead. 3 weeks later. He did not stay at my house. I did not ask him to. That disappointed me. I did not admit it. Progress has limits. We met at the Arts Center. Peter suggested it. I understood why. Neutral territory. He arrived 10 minutes early. I arrived 20. I told myself traffic had improved unexpectedly. Peter was standing beside Rose's piano. He was 53. His hair had gone nearly white. He wore glasses. He looked like my father. That was unfair. I was already emotional enough. Dad? Peter. We stood 6 feet apart. 18 years had somehow created an invisible piece of furniture between us. Then Peter stepped forward. I did too. We hugged. Briefly. Badly. But we hugged. Then Peter saw the plaque. Rose Mercer. Underneath. 1977 to 2026. Not her life. The years the piano lived in our house. Peter touched the wood. You gave it to them. Yes. Mark told me. He complains. He was impressed. That is worse. Peter sat on the bench. His hands rested above the keys. Then he stopped. May I? A simple question. It nearly broke me. For decades, Peter had played that piano without permission. Then he spent 18 years unable to enter the house where it stood. Now it belonged to neither of us. And he asked. Yes. Peter played. Nothing dramatic. Nothing Rose had loved especially. Just scales first. Checking the tuning. Then a melody I knew but could not name. Grace appeared in the doorway. She did not interrupt. 2 children stopped in the hall to listen. Then 3. Peter kept playing. And suddenly I remembered a Saturday morning almost 50 years earlier. Peter was 8. Mark was 12. Rose sat at the piano. I stood by the front door telling everyone we were going to be late. Rose said, "Walter, sit down for 5 minutes." I said, "We don't have 5 minutes. We had 50 years." I simply did not know it. When Peter finished, I was crying openly. At 78, I had finally lost interest in pretending tears required privacy. Peter closed the keyboard cover. Mom played that at Emily's first recital. I wasn't there. No. He did not soften it. I nodded. Tell me about it. So he did. Peter stayed 3 days. He had dinner at my house the second night. And came. Mark came. It was the first time all 4 of us had sat around my dining table in 18 years. Nobody knew where to sit. That sounds insignificant. It wasn't. Peter used to sit beside Rose. Rose's chair was empty. Peter chose the chair opposite it. Mark noticed. So did I. Dinner was terrible. Not the food. And cooked. The conversation. We tried weather. Baseball. Anne's job. Grandchildren. Every harmless topic felt like 4 people agreeing not to touch the large object sitting in the center of the table. Eventually, Peter touched it. He looked at Mark. "I'm sorry I left you with everything." Mark put down his fork. "I'm sorry I sent you away from the funeral." Peter nodded. "I hated you for that." "I know. No." Peter looked at him. "I really hated you." Mark smiled slightly. "Better." Anne started crying. Both brothers looked at her. "What?" Mark asked. Anne wiped her face. "I have wanted you two to have this argument for 15 years. Peter laughed. Mark did too. Then they argued. Properly. Mark accused Peter of leaving every practical problem for him. Peter accused Mark of using responsibility as permission to control everyone. Mark said Peter romanticized distance because he did not have to deal with consequences. Peter said Mark romanticized sacrifice because admitting he had choices would make resentment harder to justify. I tried to interrupt twice. And kicked me under the table. Hard. I stopped. Eventually, the argument ran out of old sentences. That was when it became useful. Mark said, "I envied you." Peter looked confused. Me? You left. You built your own life. You weren't the emergency contact for everybody. Peter answered, "I envied you." Mark almost laughed. Why? You stayed. You knew Mom's doctors. You had Sunday dinners. You were there when she needed something. You got to be angry at me because you belonged. Both men became quiet. I looked between my sons. For 18 years, each had believed the other received the better part of the family. Neither had noticed how much both parts cost. Then Peter looked at me. "Dad, there's something else." I almost laughed. I had developed a strong dislike of that sentence. What? Mom wanted to tell you about me before she died. I looked at Mark. He shook his head. He did not know. Peter continued. She asked me if she could tell you everything. What did you say? No. I stared at him. Why? Peter looked down. Because I wanted you to call me without Mom arranging it. The words hurt. Then he added. And because I was angry. I knew she was sick. I knew there might not be much time. But part of me still wanted to win. Nobody spoke. Peter looked at me. So when you think about all the years Mom kept us apart, don't. She tried. We made her carry the bridge because neither of us wanted to walk first. That was the hardest truth in any of Rose's letters. And she had not even written it. After dinner, Mark and Peter washed dishes together. Not because we experienced miraculous healing. Because Anne announced she had cooked and therefore refused. I offered. All three children told me to sit down. Normally I would have been offended. That night I obeyed. I sat in Rose's chair. From the kitchen, I heard Mark say, "You're putting too much soap in." Peter said, "You've been controlling things since 1976. Mark said, "And you've been bad at dishes since 1978. Anne laughed. I closed my eyes. For a second, I could almost imagine Rose sitting beside me. Then I stopped. Not because I wanted to forget her. Because I finally understood she did not need to be imagined into every room for the family she built to continue living. Peter went home. We did not promise weekly calls. We did not promise holidays. We did not promise 18 lost years could be replaced by enthusiasm. We agreed on Sunday evenings. Not every Sunday. Most. The first call lasted 17 minutes. The second lasted 9. The third lasted an hour because Peter made the mistake of asking my opinion about replacing his roof. He regretted it. I enjoyed myself immensely, Mark did something harder. He stopped coming to my house every time something minor went wrong. At first I thought he was angry. Then he explained. "You know how to call a plumber?" "I do." "You know how to schedule your own appointments?" "Yes." "So I'm going to let you." I stared at him. "Is this revenge for the piano?" "No. Because it feels like revenge." Mark smiled. "Mom said you were going to hate independence once it required paperwork." Again. Dead 3 years and still insulting me. Something changed between Mark and me after that. He visited less. I enjoyed the visits more. For years, I had measured his love partly by availability. If I called and he came, he cared. If he said he was busy, some childish part of me kept score. I had never admitted that. Rose knew. Of course she did. One Saturday Mark said, "I can't come over. Dana and I are going away." Normally I would have answered, "That's fine," in the tone that meant it was absolutely not fine. Instead I said, "Have fun." Mark waited. Then, "That's it? What else do you want?" "I don't know." "You sound disappointed." I prepared an argument. I laughed. "Use it next time." The Arts Center invited me to Rose's piano dedication that autumn. Dedication was Grace's word. I called it an excuse to serve supermarket cake beside a piano. Peter came back. So did Dana. And my granddaughter Emily. Peter's Emily. I had seen photographs by then. Photographs did not prepare me. She had Rose's smile. Not exactly. Nobody gets a dead person back that neatly. But when she smiled, one side of her mouth lifted first. Rose did that. Emily walked toward me. I did not know whether to hug her. She solved it. She hugged me. "Hi, Grandpa." I cried before I could answer. "I would like to tell you I said something meaningful." I said, "You're taller than your grandmother said." Emily laughed. "She said you were bad under pressure." I looked at Peter. "How many stories did your mother tell these people?" "All of them." That should have bothered me. It didn't. Mark arrived with his Emily. The two cousins had met before. I had not known that either. Apparently Anne had spent years organizing occasional cousin meetings because she had decided her brother's argument should not become inherited property. I told her I was offended by the amount of family activity occurring without me. And kissed my cheek. "You were very difficult." Fair. Grace gathered everyone near the piano. 20 children sat in folding chairs. Parents stood along the walls. The plaque read, "Rose Mercer Piano. May it always be played." That last line was Grace's addition. I approved. Then Grace asked whether anyone from the family wanted to say something. Everyone looked at me. I hated that. Then I stood. I told the children Rose bought the piano second-hand in 1977. She and I had been married 3 years. We could not afford it. Rose bought it anyway. She paid $20 a month to a woman from church until it was hers. I complain every month. Then Peter started playing. I stopped complaining about the payments. Mostly. Then I looked at Peter. I did not always understand what this piano gave my family. I thought it was music. It was a place where my wife and my son understood each other. I resented that sometimes. So did my other son. Mark raised his hand. Can confirm. People laughed. So did I. The piano spent 3 years in my house without being played because I thought preserving it meant preserving Rose. I was wrong. Rose did not spend 52 years with me so I could turn her belongings into a museum after she died. She would have hated the dust. More laughter. Then I looked at the children. So play it. Badly first. Everybody does. Play the same song 50 times until your parents consider moving. Scratch it. Miss notes. Argue over whose turn it is. Just do not let anybody convince you something has to stay untouched in order to matter. I sat down. Peter was crying. Mark was too. Anne had been crying since the cake arrived. She was no longer useful as a measure. Then both Emilys played together. One on the upper register. One lower. A simple piece Rose used to teach beginners. Peter stood behind his daughter. Mark stood beside his. I watched my two sons watch their daughters play their mother's piano. For years, I had believed family continuity meant keeping things where they had always been. Same house. Same piano. Same traditions. Same people sitting in the same chairs. But that afternoon, Rose's piano was 6 miles from my living room. One son lived 700 miles away. My wife was gone. Half the family had spent years speaking around me. And somehow we were more together than we had been in decades. That is the irritating thing about life. It rarely repairs itself in the shape you were trying to preserve. Peter and I still disagree. That surprised me at first. I thought reconciliation would make him less wrong. Apparently 18 years of distance did not improve his opinions. He still thinks I worry too much about money. I still think musicians use the phrase creative life to avoid discussing pensions. We have reached an agreement. I do not inspect his choices for weaknesses unless he asks. He does not interpret every practical question as an attack. We fail regularly. But now we fail while speaking. Mark and Peter are slower. That is their business. A lesson I learned approximately 40 years late. They call each other sometimes. Mark visited Peter once. Peter visited again for Christmas. They argued over politics before lunch and whether the turkey was dry after it. I considered both excellent signs. The clean rectangle where the piano stood disappeared after I rearranged the living room. Mark helped. This time he asked first. We moved Rose's chair near the window. I put a small bookshelf where the piano had been. On top sits one photograph. Rose at the piano. Peter beside her at 14. Mark in the background wearing a baseball uniform and pretending not to look. For decades, I had never noticed him in the photograph. Now he is the first person I see. The letters are in my desk. All 34. Peter offered to take them. I said no. Then I remembered recent history. So I had copies made. Peter has one set. Mark has one. Anne has one. Nobody in this family is ever again going to depend on a piano for document storage. One letter stayed with me. Number 34. The last. Rose wrote it 6 months before she died. She never mailed it. It was addressed to Peter, but she placed it in the piano with the copies. The final paragraph said, "I used to think my job was keeping this family together. I was wrong. People cannot be held together. They have to keep choosing one another." I read that paragraph often. Not because it comforts me. Because it corrects me. For 18 years, I told myself Peter had stopped choosing us. The truth was more embarrassing. He had stopped choosing a version of family in which he could only belong by admitting I had been right about him. Mark kept choosing us until choice began feeling like obligation. Then obligation became resentment. And I rewarded his reliability by giving him more things to be reliable about. And tried to keep everyone connected while remaining safely outside the arguments. Rose built bridges in secret because she feared asking us to cross them openly. And me? I mistook being the father for being the center. None of us were villains. That would have made the story easier. We were people who loved one another and repeatedly found ways to make that love harder than it needed to be. Last month, I went to the Arts Center alone. No dedication. No family visit. No special occasion. Grace was tuning a piano in another room. Rose's piano sat in classroom 6. A little boy was playing. Badly. Very badly. The same 8 notes. Again. 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 His teacher said, "Slow down." The boy played faster. I smiled. Rose would have been delighted. And this time, I allowed myself to think it. When the lesson ended, the boy ran out. I walked over to the piano. The burn mark was still there. The chipped keys were still there. There was a new scratch near the right leg. For 1 second, I was offended. Then I remembered my speech. Play it. Scratch it. Let it matter. I touched the lid. "Looks like you're doing all right," I said. I was speaking to a piano. At 78, I have earned a few eccentricities. Grace entered behind me. "You want it back yet?" "No." "You sure?" I looked toward the hallway where the boy had disappeared. "Yes." And that time, I was. My son gave away my late wife's piano without asking me. He was wrong. I want that clear. People sometimes hear the ending of a story and decide the beginning has been forgiven by it. It hasn't. Mark should have asked. Rose should have been able to speak about Peter without fearing my reaction. Peter should not have let 18 years of pride become an identity. I should have called my son. Understanding why people hurt one another does not turn the hurt into permission. But understanding can tell you what to do next. I lost 18 years with Peter. I cannot get them back. I missed my granddaughter's childhood. I cannot become the grandfather she had at 7 by trying harder at 26. Mark spent years believing usefulness was the price of being the son who stayed. I cannot return those evenings to him. Rose carried conversations none of us were brave enough to have. I cannot apologize to her in a way she can answer. There are losses that remain losses. Growing older teaches you that whether you want the lesson or not. But losing time does not require you to waste what remains in honor of it. Peter calls on Sundays. Mark comes by when he wants to. And comes by whether anyone wants her to. Both Emilys send photographs. I keep Rose's letters. And 27 children are learning to play a piano that spent 3 years sitting silent because I confused possession with remembrance. I still miss Rose every morning. That did not change. I hope it never does. But I no longer need the living room to look exactly as it did when she was alive in order to prove that she mattered. Her piano is somewhere noisy now. Being touched. Played badly. Played beautifully. Used. I think that is better. Rose once told Peter that people cannot be held together. They have to keep choosing one another. At 78, I finally understand what she meant. Family is not the people who never leave. It is not the people who stay no matter what it costs them. It is not a house, a Sunday dinner, a surname, or a piano against a wall. Family is a decision. Sometimes a daily one. Sometimes one you failed to make for 18 years. And sometimes, if you are very lucky, the people you failed are still there when you finally decide differently. I was lucky. Rose would probably say stubborn. For once, I will not argue with her.